Hi, welcome everyone. It is another live feed with Mad and Steph. And tonight it is Trans Awareness Month. So we're going to be talking about LGBTQ plus survivors. So for those of you that don't know, Trans Awareness Month is set aside because trans Americans are really at risk, more at risk than many populations. And 2020 has been the deadliest year on record for transgender and gender non-conforming community. And out of the 35 deaths, 26 were Black and Latinx victims. And so this really highlights, again, kind of what we've been talking about all last month is that a survivor's intersecting identities, the more identities they have where they're oppressed, so being oppressed as a Black person or a Latinx person, and then also the oppression that they face being a trans person, really put them in so much risk in our society. And so that is separate from domestic violence, but it's still involved because a lot of those deaths are related to sexual violence or domestic violence. So we know that when we look at LGBTQ survivors, and so for those of you that aren't aware, LGBTQ plus stands for lesbian, gay, transsexual, or transgender, bisexual, queer or questioning, and the plus is there's so many other identities. We can have a whole Facebook Live about what that means, but this population is experiencing domestic violence at equal or higher rates to their heterosexual and gender conforming counterparts. And when we look at, not only is this population experiencing this abuse at a higher rate, right, and we know are more at risk of facing violence that leads to death, there are some tactics that are specific to the LGBTQ plus population. So whenever we think about a population that is experiencing abuse, the ways that someone uses power and control are always going to be that core, right? So the physical violence, isolation, emotional abuse, those things are all still there, but then there's another layer around that. And so because someone's experience in society with oppression, right, being, when you think about a trans person, if they're living in a state where you're not allowed to use the bathroom in the gender that you identify with, well, then let's say you are a trans woman. And so either you go into the men's room and are at risk there, or you go into the woman's room and are at risk there. And so that's really saying that you can't leave your home without, right? If you can't go to the bathroom in public, can you leave your home? And so that oppression that you're facing is then kind of used by your partner. So the fact that you're not considered a human, right? Humans should be able to go to the bathroom, right? Where they're out in public in a safe place. That perhaps calling that person it, right, as part of the abuse brings on that same dynamic that they're experiencing of the oppression in the community. There also are a lot of ways in which it can be, if someone's first experience in that community, if someone is a young gay man or a lesbian woman, and it's their first relationship with a partner of the same sex, a lot of the time, those abusive tactics are kind of explained as this is just part of what this is, right? This is just what this is like in this relationship and in our community. You also might have a misconception that if I'm in a lesbian relationship, that women don't batter, right? That's men that use physical abuse. And so it can't possibly be an abusive relationship because that dynamic doesn't exist. And so these things can be additional nuances and barriers or ways that their abusive partner can get that control. For a trans person, you require hormones sometimes for that transition. And so your abusive partner maybe hides those hormones so that you can't have access to that. And so, Laverne Cox has a really amazing special called The T Word, where she explores transgender experience, and she calls it living your truth. And so imagine if in order to live your truth, you needed medication, and your partner, the person supposed to love you more than anyone, hides it from you and calls you it and demeans you. And that's something that you're also experiencing out in the community. So these are some of the things that are really specific, that add another layer, right, to that abuse. So it's anything, it could also be related to perhaps my internalized homophobia. If I've grown up in a society that says that that's not okay, my abusive partner can take advantage of that and make me feel like I've done something wrong. And, what are your parents going to think? That threat of outing someone is a huge factor in an abusive relationship. If the person that's the victim has not yet told family or friends or their place of employment, that can be a huge barrier for them. And so when we look at, what might be a specific dynamic or barrier for someone in that community to identifying that it's abuse or getting free, would be, maybe that they believe that myth, right? Well, women don't batter. That doesn't happen in a lesbian relationship. Or maybe if I'm a homosexual man, I don't think that there are services available for me, right? That's a battered women's shelter. I couldn't possibly go there. Or this is just what this relationship is like. Or perhaps, a man goes to get a restraining order and is demeaned for going and seeking that assistance. And so all these things can add, it's not a reason someone's staying, right? They're not choosing the abuse, but it could be a barrier to them leaving if they want to. What's important to know is that at JBWS, your gender identity, your sexual orientation, these things do not matter as far as our services are concerned. Our safe house does house men as well. We recently changed our name from Jersey Battered Women's Services to JBWS so that we can make sure that no one feels excluded based on their identity, based on living their truth. And so we want to make sure that all survivors know that they're welcome in our services and that our services are available to anyone, not despite their identity, but because of their identity, right? Anyone that's experiencing abuse is welcome at JBWS. And there is so much more work to do, right, in our community and all around to enhance services and to enhance how LGBTQ plus survivors navigate these systems. JBWS is having a conference next Friday, November 20th, building inclusive domestic violence practices, but really it can be for anyone that is working with someone that is a domestic violence survivor, wants to enhance their work for LGBTQ plus domestic violence survivors, because we can all do better for this population. And beyond what JBWS is doing, I think it's also important to note some of the really historic landmarks from this recent election for the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah, absolutely, Steph. Taylor Small is the first elected transgender state legislator, and there were many other pivotal elections like this as well. So it's definitely important to highlight that, and another awesome thing to talk about during November for Trans Awareness Month.
Thanks, Maddie. I think, there is always more work to do. And sometimes as we're climbing that mountain, it can feel like, oh, it's so far to go, but it's nice to look back and see how far we've come. So I'm, hoping that this awareness about the way that domestic violence impacts this community can transition to an action, right? What's one thing that you can do to help continue that awareness or create social change. And that could be attending our conference, or it could be, sharing this video with someone else on Facebook. We are really excited to be continuing these Prevention Thursdays. So if you have topics that you want to hear about, please feel free to add those in the comments down below. And we look forward to interacting with you all in the future. Bye, guys. Have a great night.